Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. Nicky Pharaoh is the managing director and owner of The Learning Curve, a people assessment and development company focused on behavioural change inside companies. A few months ago, one of my clients asked me to talk to Nicky about some of her ideas on behaviour and management structures and how they can be applied inside customer service organisations. I thought it would be a good idea to follow up with a podcast asking her to explain some of her thoughts on how people management needs to evolve, and particularly in the CX environment. We talked recently about how digital disruption's having a profound impact on the way that companies need to be organised and how people themselves should be managed. In short, what we're talking about is where we have this constantly disrupted environment that really values change and innovation. The old style management hierarchies are going to change, and we'll be looking more towards networks of skilled people. This is going to be a really dramatic change to the way that most people work today. So how would you summarise some of the effects of this change?
Well, it's true. Digital disruption is having a profound impact on the way companies need to be organised and how people are being managed. But does this have an impact on the management hierarchies, which in turn means these will break up into networks of skilled people like you just asked? I believe, and all the research that I've done, is that management team layers will actually reduce because of digital AI and automation. I know it's obvious, but that's true. And we'll see flatter structures because business structures, process systems will get turned on their head. And we're seeing it with the clients that we work with. You've got analytics. We're seeing more cross-functional working parties, working collectively together, mapping out workflows and interdependencies to better serve the customer. We're seeing that a lot, especially in the housing sector. We're being massively disrupted by technology. There's more consultation at different levels in the business in a more inclusive way, which is different. However, leaders will need to lead differently. Leadership is my area of expertise. And we will still need leaders, and they will need to lead the people to deliver the business strategy. So there will be a hierarchy, but they will, from the research I've done, in my opinion, is to reduce and get flat, as I've just said. I think it's having a more important role to play. And they'll need to evolve and adapt, because they're still going to need to change. They're going to need to be more agile. They have to collaborate across boundaries, especially with their teams, because the boundaries will become boundaryless. And they need to create that psychological safety for innovation, for taking risks, and for learning fast, for example. So I think it will change for leaders. So my point, I guess, in answer to your question, Mark, is that management hierarchies, they will change. We will still need leaders more than ever. We will have networks of skilled people, but I don't think the management hierarchies will break into those networks of skilled people. I think the people they lead will. There'll be the small networks of very skilled people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, no, go ahead.
Okay, but so I do think the workplace is changing, and in turn its impact the shape of the workforce. And I call that workforce of networks of skilled people a multidimensional workforce. And it's an ecosystem made up of workers who are multi-generation as well, which has a very different dimension to that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that we're seeing a lot of this change taking place in the customer service environment. Companies have already realised that the agents that they put in the contact centre are not just there to handle complaints. They're directly engaging every day with customers, and this is creating the experience, and it shapes the way that people see that company. I know that your expertise is more around digital leadership and not necessarily customer experience. But do you think that the way that we're seeing this change and this disruption of roles, specifically this sort of elevated importance of people that were previously considered to be sort of in very basic jobs, but now they're becoming very important. I mean, do you think that this could be disconcerting to those who are used to the very traditional way of managing teams?
See, I think that, I don't see it as an elevated importance of agents. I think it's a broadening and deepening of their role to move with the times and to focus on the customer experience. And I think that I see the development of their role because they're connecting with the customer differently and expanding their relationship and the experience of the service that they give. And I think that contact centres have changed a lot, Mark. I think that they are developing their leaders, and I think they are supporting their leaders in the transition to move away from more traditional ways of managing teams. I do see that. I believe this is happening. It's an outdated view. It's disconcerting for more traditional leaders because it is happening. And it's slowly, yes, I think it's slow, but it's an evolution, all targeting the customer experience. And it's also about, leaders, they do have to change. We know they have to change, and the agent's role is changing. But I also think that leaders need to understand that the workforce what the workforce is actually made up of. So if they have a mindset change around the workforce that they're leading, which is made up of permanent employees, made up by extended talent pools, you've got the growth of home working, you've got virtual offices, you've got a rise in flexible working. I'm sure that the contact centres will have people working flexibly as well, that they can't actually be working virtually. And that's what people want. I think if leaders understand how the workforce is changing, what it's made up of, how they need to lead differently, I think that expansive awareness, emotional intelligence and understanding will impact the way that they view the role of the customer service agent and the benefit of that and the experience for the customer.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've written a lot in the past about how customer-facing activities in different silos, such as marketing, sales, or customer service, they're all really just one part of the same thing, which is engaging with the customer and managing that customer relationship. But we tend to still see organizations organized in these silos. Is this supported by your own research? I mean, the way that silos are being destroyed in companies today?
Yeah, I see it happening. I think companies are breaking down the silos. And I think it's the ones who are moving to a more functional structure as opposed to like a regional functional structure. They seem to be getting the most traction. And if this isn't the company structure to have a functional structure, I think there's a greater need for what I call collective leadership, which is where the different functions lead to the greater good and not just their own functional area. It's vital for business that this happens to impact the customer experience, like you say. I think that what I do see is a lack of collective leadership mindset. And I think that's where development and team coaching can really have an impact, that people lead for the greater good. And if people are going to lead for the greater good, I think it's going to significantly impact the customer experience and different touch points that a customer will experience when contacting with an organisation. And I also think it's a challenge to see an executive role model and collectively lead in this way. I do think it's difficult, and how they cascade it throughout the organisation. It requires what I call a systemic approach, which includes thinking about the systems and processes that support the ways of working that organisations want people to adapt to. So, for example, if I think of all the senior directors, they need to be aligned and rewarded for the collective performance, not their functional performance. It sounds simple, but you'd be surprised at how those actually don't align and run through the business systemically. And they need to be backed up by KPIs as well. And I also think the competitive spirit that's encouraged in business compounds this style of behaviour. And I see it played out as a game of power and control that's detrimental to the business. It comes about the individual and not the customer and business performance. I think it's a hard mindset to change, but one I do think is changing.
And is that something that we see differently today? I mean, within the sort of modern digital startup environment, are these organisations doing something fundamentally different in the way their employees work compared to the sort of legacy or heritage organisation?
Well, I think that the profitable digital brands are reinventing the workplace, and they can adapt to a multi-generational and a multi-dimensional workforce because they have the structures and they're set up that way. I think it works for them, and they can afford to do it. So they have a greater focus on innovation, less hierarchy, and more social purpose, which is appealing to the multi-generation. But that's very different to a Tesco, for example, because their margins they're just very different. If you think of Zappos, they sell shoes, and the MD made a mystery shopper called up to order a pizza. And the agent said, "Sure, I can help you. Let me find you a place to get a pizza," and ordered it. I don't think a heritage brand would do that. the drivers are more margin orientated and haven't, I don't think, made quite the leap. The staff and customer engagement is what it's all about. And heritage brands are more incremental, I think, compared to, so WeWork, for example, expanded to 29 countries so quickly.
Yeah. I mean, as a final point then, because you've talked about the problems of leading multi-generational teams with different skills, probably in global organizations. I mean, if I was a manager today that was hiring you, I would think it almost feels too difficult to change. You know, if I've got a very silo-driven traditional organization, when you go in to talk to organizations, what are the sort of first messages that you normally give to them?
Well, our leadership development programs are very much around the context of the organisation and depending on their challenges as to how we support them. But our development is about helping leaders to lead through this challenging landscape. So we help them to lead a multi-generational team, for them to make sure that they listen to people as an individual, they don't stereotype. And if they're working with remote workers, to build trust, to have stronger communication, to keep people connected. And so we do a lot of different things around how people would change their mindsets and give them tools and a toolkit that they can dip into to help them to manage the multidimensional teams, the different generations that they've got, and the challenges that they've got. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all, because it isn't. It's about developing people's emotional intelligence to understand how their behaviour impacts not only themselves, but the people they work with, and the organisation and the business impacts and results that they get. So raising that self-awareness and to give them the confidence and the courage to lead in an environment that's different, that's changing. We don't know what it's going to end up looking like because we don't. But to give them that emotional agility and that toolkit to be able to flex and respond and make conscious decisions to bring around conscious change.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm @Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.